So the Brexit process, this is what the motion's about. It's seriously damaged our relations with the European partners, and it's damaged our reputation in the world. There are anxieties about weakening security cooperation across Europe. So people expect responsible politicians like the Liberal Democrats here. They expect us to protect the environment. They expect that we will maintain a strong and sustainable economy, provide good services, enable strong communities. And Brexit puts all these things at risk. Our party, our leadership and our elected representatives, and most of us here today have taken that responsible view. So I would like to say thank you, Liberal Democrats, for your unwavering support for the campaign to exit Brexit. So here in the Northwest, many people did vote leave. However, opinion polls are showing a growing support for the people's vote and for remaining in the EU. So many people have clearly changed their minds, and having seen the awful impact of Brexit negotiations and the broken promises of those reckless people who peddled lies during the Leave campaign, it's not really very surprising. So it's the Labour Party who are meant to be leading the opposition. The Labour Party who consistently failed and totally failed to back a people's vote. This is despite the majority support both among the public at large and among its own membership. Once again, it's the Liberal Democrats who've had our fingers on the pulse all along. All our campaigns have been calling for a people's vote on the deal since the beginning. The chair here mentioned the mayoral campaign. That was all about staying in the EU. And every by-election since then, it's been the Liberal Democrats who've talked about the people's vote and remaining in the EU. So all of us want to promote a bright future for our young people. Our Northwest industries can only continue to thrive if today's young people can in fact enter a growing jobs market. A no-deal Brexit, it will consign a generation of our young people to a poor future. After all, it was them that refused a choice in 2016. It was the Liberal Democrats that wanted our 16 and 17-year-olds to have a vote so that they could have a say there and then. And no doubt we wouldn't be in this ridiculous position now if we had had our 16 and 17-year-olds voting then. They're the people whose future that we're talking about here. So we know that the EU contributes massively to our Northwest economy. Are people really comfortable with putting that at risk as a result of a no-deal Brexit? And we're also seeing the accelerating transfer of highly skilled jobs and tax revenues away from the City of London to other European financial centres, and all of this away from the Northwest. So we're seeing a loss of highly skilled jobs in sectors in the Northwest, particularly engineering and aerospace. All these affect more in the north of England. We're also seeing the permanent and growing damage to scientific research and all its economic spin-offs. What about the impact of Brexit on our universities and higher education? Here in the Northwest, we've got so many great places to study. We've got Manchester, we've got Liverpool, Lancaster and more. We're putting all that at risk. So we know that recent economic predictions for the UK as a whole indicate that even the softness of Brexit was doing at least as much harm as the financial crisis of a decade ago, perhaps even more harm. And we know so much that the Northwest would suffer more than London and the South. So this slowdown in our economy since the referendum, it's meant a 26 billion per year loss in government revenue. And all this is at a time when our key public services are suffering unsustainable cuts. At the same time, we're hearing about the potential tragedy of universal benefits being rolled out. There's no investment to make that work. This loss of revenue is amounting to 500 million per week, and it's far worse and dwarfs this mythical and discredited £350 million per week, falsely promoted by the Leave campaign on the back of buses. So, a no-deal Brexit, it will result in catastrophic damage to our jobs, the economy, our environment and our livelihoods. And post-Brexit, we could be facing civil unrest. There is mounting public concern at the prospect of leaving the EU with no deal or a bad deal. 150,000 people marched for a people's vote in London last June. And it's looking like many more will be marching next weekend. Who's already booked their ticket for next weekend? Yay! Probably far more than in this room listening to me right now. That's brilliant. So what about the environmental impact of Brexit? putting us at further risk of climate change. We heard Tim Barron talk about that. Our capacity to deliver public services in health and social care will be severely impacted by a no-deal Brexit. So the EU withdrawal bill threatens the rights of so many citizens as well as environmental protections, and oh so many things that we heard dear. As Liberal Democrats, we share the anxieties of UK citizens. I haven't got to my last page yet.
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Okay, so across the North West, more and more councils have been calling for a people's vote. On Trafford, I've been a councillor for 18 years, and it's the first time I've ever won a motion in Trafford. Hey. Events are moving rapidly, and agreement on holding a people's vote, it is actually possible. A vote could happen any time in the coming weeks. So we must do more than just pass this motion. All Liberal Democrat local parties in the region, we need to be equipped and ready to mobilise effectively and immediately following support for the decision on a people's vote. Our local parties should be working with other Remain campaigners, including the People's Vote campaign, the European movement and others to mobilise cross-party support and community support. So, finally, I urge everyone to support this motion for a people's vote on the final Brexit deal with the option to remain in the EU. I call on all those who can attend to go on the march. I call on everyone in the North West to join our campaign for a people's vote. Thank you, colleagues.
I'm one of those who's been out on the streets for the last, since the referendum. And in particular, we've been in all the towns, in main towns in Cumbria in the last month, and we've been doing these things called Brexitometers. So I would recommend, if you haven't done any of these before, to start now and do them. It's an interesting experiment. It's very, I can explain to you later in more detail, but it does lead people initially towards accepting that we must have the people's choice. And you do it on the streets and you engage people readily. And we've, across Cumbria, we've now completed all 6 constituencies, and we're now taking the results of these to the MPs and showing them what they should, what they will expect. This one at the conference, I've amended slightly because I know you have a more sophisticated audience than my street audience, but it takes the people's vote as accepted, as you can see here with a yes. We shall achieve a people's vote. Now, most people probably in this room and in this conference don't know whether we're going to achieve a people's vote. So that's the thing that we need to encourage people to believe in. And you only do that by being on the streets, because you'll then get an effective result. There should be a united party campaign. I was very active in the Northwest in the referendum campaign, and we didn't work together as parties in that campaign. It was a pretty poorly organised and managed campaign. So this time, we must start even now and reach out to other parties of all kinds, and in particular, I quite like the People's Choice group, because I hardly know which party they belong to, and actually most of them are from no party at all. So if you can find a People's Choice group, join those and help with them. You can still help with your local elections, I do both, so it can still be done. And I certainly would like, of the conference here, Lib Dems to give the party, give the People's Choice the first priority. And I hope, and most people here today believe that's the case. And my last point is I'm willing to play an active part. So I've got a sheet outside the room, down at the bottom, for you to sign up, and when there is the People's Vote, you will be contacted and asked to help. Thank you.
Also from Cumbria, like John, and would like to speak about farming. Now, I realise that Tim spoke in Parliament, as he reminded us very eloquently on this topic during the week, and you may think, of course, of all those suffering from Brexit, why pick on farmers when we know many will be possibly even more disadvantaged. However, it is erroneously assumed often that the vast majority of farmers in this country did vote for leave, whereas NFU polls immediately before the referendum showed again and again that the split was about 50% of those who had made their mind up, with many undecided. I don't know how those find that those final few made their minds up at the end. But it was a very open issue with them. I've spoken to I'm a county councillor in Cumbria, spoken to quite a few farmers who are very concerned about Brexit and who never voted for it in the first place. The government have, of course, an agriculture bill going through Parliament. This is what Tim spoke on last week. It does emphasise the need for more agro-environment schemes and even promotes, rightly, I think, tourism, but very much at the expense of farming, saying that farmers have to produce public goods rather than just getting on necessarily what we've always done. Now, this may work out okay for farmers in some parts of the country, but not so for hill farmers, whose practices have very much made our countryside, made it the attractive area it is, not just for those who live in them, including them and their own families, but for many visitors. And they will not be able to adapt quite so easily at all to many of the ideas that the government are in distant Westminster coming up with. Another good reason, of course, for regional government, but that's for another time. Our beautiful trees and fields and lanes in areas like Cumbria and across the country, sculptured by those who farmed the land for many years and who want to keep on farming, even if it isn't necessarily economically beneficial for them. But the government is not going to allow them. Now, our party will recognise the value of diversification. There's no question about that. However, we also will want to preserve these ways of life that are so much part of our history. We recognise that families should have a living to make, but we also recognise that this is a much wider question and just quid pro quo rewards for product output. It's about our whole history. Many farmers, as I say, have already spoken to me, and I realise that even more, by coming to my final sentence, Chair, many more have undoubtedly spoken to Tim and our other rural MPs. But this is just one more reason that, as we're already doing, we as Lib Dems should be campaigning, and campaigning very hard for an exit from Brexit. Thank you very much.
Conference. I had actually suggested that we include in line D, after both the rights of citizens, the rights of workers as well. Workers are very important. They form a large section of voters, and our party tends to sideline them and leave them to vote for Labour. I think it's a mistake. We need to tap into them. Currently, workers' rights and employment rights are guaranteed by the EU. Dismissal, employment protection, the European Working Time Directive, and the rights of part-time and agency workers exclusively come from the EU. And after Brexit, these will be lost. The Tories have already decided to get rid of dismissal rights so that their fat cats can hire and fire at will. So people will lose their jobs just on the snap of a finger, will be in a job 1 minute, unemployed the next minute, with no right to go to a tribunal or get any compensation. People are going to lose their livelihoods, their careers, their jobs, and we also know that the NHS has a very problematic manpower crisis. Now, as the leader of our Doctors' Trade Union, I know that the two main reasons for doctors not being happy to work in the health services, firstly, overwork, secondly, poor terms and conditions. Doctors are overworked despite the Working Time Directive. So what is going to happen after Brexit? They will be blood-sucked. They will lose whatever rights they have. Managers will boss them and tell them to get on and work 100 hours without the break and not be paid for half the time, provide more goodwill. It's going to cause more crisis. So basically, everyone has a lot to lose from Brexit. And this is why it is very important that we campaign for a people's vote. Ideally, I would favor a second referendum, but I think that's a far cry. Because I think that people voted for leave, they did not realize what it really entailed. But anyway, the best we can get is a people's vote on the final deal. So please support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Our country's future depends now on a vote in the House of Commons that will take place within the next few weeks. MPs will be told to respect the people's wishes. It's very interesting how the debate has moved. We're not hearing very much about how a bad deal will be worse than no deal anymore. But the choice that we've presented to MPs is between no deal and a bad deal. A bad deal that will make this country a vassal state. One in which we sign up to the customs union, one in which in practice we sign up to most aspects of the single market. But we will have no seat at the table. We will accept the laws coming out of the European Union, probably in perpetuity, but we will have no seat at the table. And all of this in the withdrawal agreement and the political declaration to be announced over the next few weeks. All of these things will be dressed up in language intended to disguise the reality. If MPs vote against the deal that is presented to them, then the possibility of a people's vote becomes more likely. Now, this party is a pro-European party, always has been. We were the first to say that Britain should join the EEC. We were the first to say that the results of the referendum were disastrous for this country, and a second vote should take place when people knew what was actually on the table. We accept that we lost. We accept that. We know that 52% of the people voted against. But you can't determine government policy for the future without knowing what people actually voted for. And when I go out on the doorstep, if there is such a people's vote, I'll be asking Leave voters, did you vote to make this country poorer? Did you vote to make this country weaker? Did you vote for Britain to accept European laws made in Brussels without us having a seat at the table, without us even being in the room where the decisions are made? I don't believe that the answer to any of these questions will be affirmative. Too much, I think, and this motion reinforces these arguments. It puts forward strong economic arguments for why we should stay within the European Union. But where's the emotions? Where's the passion? Where's the recognition that Britain is being cowardly in running away from the European Union? This is our continent, and we are running away from having influence on shaping the decisions that will affect the future of us all. It's far from a perfect vessel, the European Union. Far from perfect. No one pretends that it's anything other than that. But it's a vessel that steers by stars which are liberal values, liberal stars. The values are our values. I like to think they're British values. And our country should have the courage not to leave the European Union, but to seek to lead the European Union. Our path for the future should be to promote common solutions to the problems we share. And if there is a people's vote, then it is one that we must go out and we must win.
I'll be as brief as I can. My husband and I worked in Europe for many years, and my husband's health was maintained through European doctors and nurses working in this country. My son, at this moment, is the Brexit representative for GlaxoSmithKline, the pharmaceuticals. And I just want to say this. Our country doesn't realise how poor we are health-wise when we leave. We will no longer get first pickings of the best drugs because those big consortiums deal with the biggest areas first. We are going to be one of the smallest, and we will not get that. Our whole health system, we know, is in a mess. It's going to be worse. When my husband was having his chemo, he was talking to a lot of Europeans who were working in the system. Many have already left. We cannot tell people enough about what they have done. And they did it in ignorance, and they did it in fear, because I do not think it was coincidental that at the same time as we voted, we had the problem in Calais. And that, when I've talked to people in my ward and in my area of South Manchester, that was their fear, People are coming over from Calais. We don't want it. Let's get out of Europe. They didn't think. They voted in ignorance, and we've somehow or other got to stop that ignorance from growing. Thank you.
Conference. Jane reminded us a number of things that are in the motion, but one of the key things that she reminded us of was how central we have been to this fight. Chris also alluded to it, but just think for a moment what would have happened if in the weeks immediately after the referendum this party had dithered, this party had said, oh dear, we lost, we're going to accept it. Then I think the whole bubble would have burst. The general public, all those 48%, and now the growing figure, that regret the decision that was taken, would have been drifted away and would have been lost to us. We would not be anywhere near winning a people's vote, and we would not be anywhere near the option of winning one if we get it. So I say that because as a party we've had a few knocks over recent years, and the referendum was one of the biggest. And we have to think that if something happens, we are the grit in the oyster that would have led to that pearl. And that's why we mustn't lose our momentum now. That's why we must be prepared for every option. John, with his Brexitometer, highlighted the kind of campaigning that we've been doing with others and the need to continue that. And that has been so much part of the process of winning hearts and minds that when I go out on the street, usually with the European movement rather than as a Liberal Democrat in Macclesfield and round, the atmosphere is very much different now from when we were campaigning for the referendum. People come to us. People don't walk by. People aren't reluctant. They are coming there and saying, thank you for being here. Yes, I'm with you. Even the people who are anti to us are being far more polite and beginning to let us talk to them. So the work of the Brexitometer and how that campaign must continue is extremely important. Neil spoke about farming. Often, and quite rightly pointed out, that we assumed that that was an area of great leave strength, and that is linked to the points that Jane and others have made about the environment and the environmental protections that are so important to Europe. And we barely need reminding of what we're losing. It's in our blood, but we do still need to stop and think about what we've done and what the consequences would have been if we hadn't. Shinaz spoke about workers' rights in general, but also in particular the Working Time Directive, and gave the example of the health service. As the parent of a doctor who specialised in emergency medicine, the number of times that my daughter's rotas drove a coach and horses through the Working Time Directive, even where we are now, were quite astonishing. And as Shinaz said, where would we be in medicine and in other industries if we lose those protections? Chris, I think, highlighted where we could be going to if we don't get the people's vote. The fact that we would probably, it looks like there is no way out of us being very much tied to the EU, being probably in the customs union and almost in the single market, even if they wrap it up in different ways. That there may be some on one side of the channel, it will be said that that is not time limited, and on this side of the channel will be forms of words that pretend that it is. And I think the thing that struck me about Chris's intervention was, as well as being prepared to get a people's vote, to win a people's vote, part of winning that people's vote will be our vision for the Europe that we want afterwards. And I think that a Europe where we don't lead but lead, and talking about the kind of visions that we have for a better Europe, is going to be part of what Chris said, and what Beryl also showed, the emotional side, which was lacking in the last campaign. That vision, showing our vision for the future, rather than just the sort of economic factors, the dry statistics that people were able to dismiss. I mean, the fact that people actually said, experts? Who are experts? We don't listen to experts. Let's give them the hearts and minds time this round. Let's win it. Let's give them our vision for the future, and let's win it on those grounds. Beryl spoke from personal experience of the health issues and also things like the pharmaceutical industry and no drugs. I too have personal experience there. I have another daughter who works on clinical trials for biopharmaceutica, and she will tell you the same story that Beryl has said. So, conference. This motion is here to help us keep our eye on the ball. With so much going on around us, with preparations for elections, we need to be on a war footing. We need to be able to react the day after the people's vote becomes a reality, in the same way that we started to react the day after we lost the referendum. So conference, my message and the message I think of everybody that spoke to you is be like the Boy Scouts and be prepared. Get back there and keep working, and then be prepared to work even harder. Thank you for your attention.